I used to think regret would arrive loudly. Like an alarm you can't ignore. Like a moment that splits your life into before and after. I was wrong. Regret is quiet. It waits until everything looks stable enough to collapse silently. If you had met me a few years ago, you would have said I was doing well. That's the phrase people use when they don't look too closely. I had a routine, responsibilities, people who relied on me. I knew where I was supposed to be and what I was supposed to want. And that was the problem. I didn't choose my life. I agreed to it. It started early. Small decisions that didn't feel like decisions at all. Choosing the safer option. Avoiding disappointment. Saying yes because no felt selfish. Over time, those small agreements became a script I followed without questioning. I learned how to be dependable. Predictable. Easy to be proud of. What I never learned was how to be honest. The first time I noticed something was wrong, I ignored it. It happened one evening, standing in my kitchen, holding a glass of water I wasn't thirsty for. I remember thinking, if this is my life forever, I don't know how long I can do it. The thought scared me, so I buried it. I told myself everyone feels this way sometimes. That dissatisfaction was normal. That meaning was overrated and stability was enough. I repeated those ideas until they sounded like truth. Years passed like that. Smooth. Orderly. Empty. I stopped asking myself questions that didn't have easy answers. I stopped imagining alternatives. I trained myself to be grateful instead of curious. And gratitude, when forced, becomes a cage. People around me didn't notice. Why would they? I smiled. I showed up. I did what was expected. I became very good at performing contentment. But at night, when everything was quiet, something inside me stayed awake. I would lie there, staring at the ceiling, replaying moments from my past, not mistakes, but missed turns. Conversations I avoided. Opportunities one dismissed because they felt inconvenient. Versions of myself I never gave a chance to exist. The worst part wasn't sadness. It was numbness. When joy fades slowly, you don't notice it leaving. One day you realize you're no longer moved by things that used to matter. Music becomes noise. Achievements feel hollow. Compliments slide off you without landing anywhere. I became a witness to my own life instead of a participant. There was someone who noticed before I did. She asked questions I didn't know how to answer. Not accusations, just concern. She said I felt far away even when I was right there. She asked what I wanted, where I saw myself, whether I was happy. I hated those questions. Not because they were unfair. Because they were accurate. Every time she asked, I felt exposed. Like someone was shining a light on a room I had deliberately kept dark. So I deflected. Changed the subject. Joked. Promised I was fine. Eventually, she stopped asking. That's when I should have spoken. But silence had already become my reflex. The moment everything shifted wasn't dramatic. No argument. No crisis. Just a quiet realization during an ordinary day. I was sitting at my desk, staring at my screen, when I realized I couldn't remember the last decision I had made purely because I wanted to. Not because it was logical. Not because it was expected. Just because it felt right. That realization hit harder than any failure ever had. I had built a life designed to avoid regret, and somehow, regret was all I felt. The idea of starting over began to appear in my thoughts. At first, it was abstract. Fantastical. Just a mental escape. Then it became specific. Cities. Names. Timelines. I imagined disappearing not because I wanted adventure, but because I wanted relief. I told myself it was selfish to even think that way. People depended on me. I had responsibilities. A past. A role to play. But roles, when worn too long, erase the person underneath. The breaking point came quietly, like everything else. I was asked to commit to a future that looked exactly like the present, just longer. More of the same, indefinitely. Everyone around me was excited. Proud. Confident. I felt trapped. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, listening to my own breathing, and finally admitted something I had avoided for years: if I stayed, I would disappear anyway. Just more slowly. So I made a choice. Not a brave one. Not a noble one. I chose escape over confrontation. Disappearance over honesty. I told myself I would explain later. That distance would help me find the right words. That leaving was temporary. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was running from the life I never chose, and from the person I had allowed myself to become. Leaving didn't feel dramatic. That surprised me. There was no single moment where I felt brave or liberated. No rush of freedom. Just a quiet, methodical detachment, like unplugging a machine that had been humming for too long. I didn't announce anything. I simplified my life until it fit into a small number of decisions that didn't require explanations. I avoided eye contact. I avoided questions. I avoided myself. The day I left, the world looked the same as it always had. Same streets. Same sky. Same ordinary rhythm. That almost broke me, the fact that nothing resisted my disappearance. I remember thinking, this is how easy it is to vanish. The first weeks felt unreal. I moved through the new city like a ghost. No one knew my history, and that felt intoxicating at first. I could answer questions vaguely. I could reinvent details. I could be undefined. I told myself that was freedom. But freedom without direction is just drifting. At night, when there was no one to perform for, the emptiness expanded. Without my old routines, I lost the structure that had kept my thoughts contained. Regret surfaced in fragments, not as scenes, but as sensations. Tightness in my chest. A sudden heaviness when I saw couples laughing. A strange ache when I heard my own name spoken by someone new, stripped of context. I tried to stay busy. Work. Walking. Noise. Anything to keep my mind from settling too long on the past. But silence has a way of finding you anyway. I started noticing how much of my identity had been built around other people's expectations. Without them, I felt unfinished. Undefined. Almost hollow. People assume that starting over means discovering who you are. For me, it meant discovering how little I knew. I didn't know what I wanted to eat, beyond convenience. I didn't know what I enjoyed, beyond distraction. I didn't know what I believed, beyond what I had inherited. That realization scared me more than staying ever had. There were moments when I considered going back. Not because I thought it would fix things, but because familiarity felt safer than uncertainty. I imagined conversations that might still be possible. Explanations that could soften the damage. But every imagined return ended the same way, with me still unable to say what needed to be said. So I stayed away. Days blurred together. The novelty of anonymity faded, replaced by a quiet loneliness that felt heavier because it was chosen. I watched people form connections effortlessly, co-workers planning weekends, strangers sharing stories, and realized how guarded I had become. I had escaped a life that felt suffocating only to build a smaller, lonelier version of it. The breaking point didn't come from isolation. It came from responsibility. A message reached me through someone I hadn't expected. Not accusatory. Not emotional. Just factual. The kind of message that carries weight precisely because it doesn't dramatize itself. They said the people I left were confused. That they were searching for reasons. That silence had created stories far worse than the truth ever would have. I sat with that information for a long time. I had convinced myself that leaving spared everyone pain. That absence was cleaner than honesty. That my silence was a form of protection. I was wrong. Silence doesn't protect. It abandons. That night, I couldn't distract myself. I walked until my legs ached, replaying moments I had avoided confronting. Every time I chose comfort over truth. Every time I stayed quiet to keep the peace. Every time I told myself later would be easier. Later never comes. I realized then that my disappearance wasn't a solution. It was a delay. A way of postponing the hardest part, accountability. I hadn't escaped consequences. I had simply relocated them. For the first time since leaving, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of what I had done. Not with self-pity. With clarity. I saw myself honestly, not as a victim of circumstance, but as someone who had made choices out of fear. Fear of disappointing others. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of discovering that my truth might not be welcomed. That understanding didn't excuse anything. But it changed something. I stopped pretending I was in control. Starting over isn't about changing locations. It's about changing how willing you are to face yourself. That night, I made a decision. Not to undo the past, that wasn't possible. But to stop adding new layers of avoidance. If I was going to live with what I had done, I would do it awake. I began writing again. Not to justify myself, but to confront myself. I wrote down what I had never admitted out loud. The compromises. The fears. The quiet betrayals of my own needs. It hurt more than leaving ever had. But it was honest. And honesty, I was learning too late, is painful, but it is also grounding. I didn't know what redemption would look like. I didn't even know if I deserved it. I only knew that disappearing had cost me something essential, and if I kept running, I would lose whatever remained. I used to believe accountability was about punishment. That facing the truth meant destroying whatever fragile piece I had left. I was wrong again. Accountability isn't loud. It doesn't arrive with dramatic gestures or public confessions. It begins quietly, the moment you stop lying to yourself about why you made the choices you did. I didn't return. Not because I didn't care, but because I finally understood something painful. Going back without having changed would only repeat the same damage in a different form. I wrote instead. Not a message designed to reopen doors. Not an apology hoping for forgiveness. I wrote because silence had already done enough harm. I told the truth as plainly as I could. That I had lived too long on autopilot. That I confused responsibility with self-erasure. That leaving wasn't about a lack of love, but a lack of courage. I admitted that I ran because I didn't know how to be honest without collapsing the life I had helped build. I didn't ask for anything in return. No reply came. And that had to be enough. Because closure isn't something another person owes you. It's something you earn by accepting that some consequences don't come with comfort. The days that followed felt heavier, but clearer. For the first time, I wasn't narrating my life from a distance. I was inside it. Uncertain. Imperfect. Present. I stopped chasing the idea of reinvention. Starting over isn't about becoming someone new. It's about finally becoming someone real. I spoke more, even when my voice shook. I admitted confusion instead of pretending certainty. I allowed discomfort to exist without immediately trying to escape it. Some people didn't like the change. Others drifted away. A few stayed. That's the price of honesty no one prepares you for. But the quiet at night felt different now. It wasn't empty. It was open. Like a room with the lights on, even if the furniture was sparse. Regret still visits me. It always will. But it no longer controls me. I don't romanticize the past or rewrite it to soften its edges. I let it be what it was, a series of choices made by someone who didn't yet know how to speak. I think often about how close I came to disappearing completely. Not physically, but internally. Living a life shaped entirely by expectation until there was nothing left underneath. The truth is simple, and devastatingly easy to miss. You don't wake up one day having lost yourself. You lose yourself gradually, every time you stay silent about what matters. I believed that avoiding conflict meant preserving peace. What it preserved was stagnation. I believed that being needed was the same as being fulfilled. What it gave me was obligation without meaning. I believed I could delay honesty without cost. The cost was time, the only thing you never get back. If there is a second chance in this story, it isn't about undoing the past. It's about refusing to repeat it. I don't promise myself happiness anymore. That promise is too vague. Too fragile. What I promise is presence. To speak before silence becomes habit. To choose truth over comfort. To stay, even when leaving feels easier. Some losses don't heal. They transform you instead. They teach you what matters by showing you what you failed to protect. I live with that knowledge now. And if someone listening to this is standing where I once stood, feeling the quiet panic of a life that looks right but feels wrong, hear this, say it imperfectly. Say it clumsily. Say it before fear convinces you that disappearing is kinder. Because silence doesn't save anyone. It just delays the moment you finally have to face yourself. And when you do, it's better to still be there.